Everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to this TransCelerate webinar on Pharmacovigilance Agreement Solutions you didn't realize you needed. My name is Clint Cron. I'm one of the directors here at TransCelerate and will be your moderator today. Today, we will begin with a few logistics and ground rules, followed by a brief overview of TransCelerate and the Pharmacovigilance Agreement Optimization Initiative. Our presenters will then offer a closer look at their work in timelines and benchmarking, along with audit process efficiency. We will then move into a Q&A session with our expert presenters. Now, a few logistics. All presenters will be muted for this call. You may reduce the control panel for a better presentation view. You may submit questions for our presenters by typing your question and clicking the send button as seen here. Please indicate if your question is for a specific presenter. Finally, please be aware that this webinar may be recorded in whole or in part. Please take a moment to download the handout for this webinar by navigating to the Handouts feature on your control panel as shown here. The handout contains links to the content we will discuss today and other related resources. We want to make this discussion helpful and answer as many of your questions as we can, so here are some additional ground rules. First, participation is voluntary, as is using TransCelerate assets or tools. Secondly, the responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopter. Thirdly, you don't need to identify what company you work for. Here are some other things that we would ask you not to discuss. What vendors, sites, or CROs you are using or not using, any issues you may have with any vendors, sites, or CROs, your long-term development plans, and anything related to costs or pricing. Also, we can't answer questions about vendors, costs of using or implementing TransCelerate assets or tools, or which TransCelerate member companies are using the solutions. And now for a brief overview of TransCelerate. TransCelerate is a not-for-profit entity created to foster collaboration. Our mission is to collaborate across the global biopharmaceutical R&D community to identify, prioritize, design, and facilitate the implementation of solutions designed to drive the efficient, effective, and high-quality delivery of new medicines. TransCelerate's collaboration is worldwide. Since inception, we have prioritized robust collaboration with key stakeholders across the R&D ecosystem, including global health authorities, data providers, industry consortia, and others. Please visit our website for all solutions, many of which are available in additional languages. The information you will hear about today has been part of a larger TransCelerate journey to develop solutions and accompanying tools to address challenges across the life cycle of pharmacovigilance agreements, otherwise known as PVAs. We want to thank the many team members who contributed directly to this work. And today, 4 of those team members will present some of the work and lessons learned. I want to introduce our speakers today. First, Yvonne Gibble is Executive Director, Pharmacovigilance Partner Strategy and Management at Merck. Yvonne has served as the co-workstream leader for this initiative. Beth MacEntee Pileggi is Senior Director, Safety Information Management and Automation at Johnson & Johnson. Beth has also served as a co-workstream leader for this initiative. Next, we have Wendy Manko Singer, who is Associate Vice President, Individual Case Medical Review, Global Clinical Safety and Pharmacovigilance, and she is also with MSD. Finally, we have Jonathan Rowell, who is Senior Director, Head of Pharmacovigilance Q&A. He is also at J&J. The speakers have requested this legal disclaimer, which I will pause and allow you to read. And now, over to Yvonne.
Thanks, Clint, and hello, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are PVAs, or pharmacovigilance agreements, and what are their challenges. So PVAs are agreements that specify the details between companies regarding several areas of safety exchange, including timelines and other key elements. Timelines are defined for all of the parties involved, and you'll hear a little bit more of that further in this discussion. The importance of PVAs is also to ensure that we remain in compliance with our regulatory reporting requirements throughout the world. The issue potentially with PVAs is that there are some contractual partner differences that can lead to difficulties when we attempt to negotiate the timelines for PVAs. Some of the things that can make us a big challenge are differences in process and procedures. So for example, if one company is managing a process in-house and another company has that process outsourced, there may be some challenges in coming up with the timelines that we can both agree on. In addition, commitments. There are various regulatory-driven commitments throughout different countries, and those can make it difficult when you're negotiating a PVA, as well as some system constraints that individual companies may have on their own individual safety database. Next slide. So what our workstream attempted to look at is, what are the inefficiencies in PVAs, and how can we come up with some solutions to try and work around those inefficiencies? So some of the things are the ambiguous contractual terms and definitions. And so if we have terms and definitions that the companies cannot agree upon, that can really lead to some issues in negotiations, as well as a potential compliance concern and future findings from an audit or an inspection. If there's a lack of awareness around operational timelines, that again can cause trouble when you're negotiating a PVA, because companies can't understand how they maybe can come to an understanding to meet those timelines. Lengthy negotiation periods can really cause delays. So if we can't get our PVAs negotiated in time, there is a potential that we could have an issue with starting a study on time, or starting any of our arrangements in our contractual partnership on time. And really the complexity of PVAs, again, can really lead to some challenges in negotiations. Next slide. So what you're seeing in this depiction here is really why we feel that these solutions are so very important. Because as you can see in the chart, the number of alliances between companies has steadily grown. The trend has been increased by things such as the pandemic, where we've had to have partnerships for vaccines as well as other medicinal development. And it's not just the number of alliances, but also the complexity. We have seen the increase in complexity, which leads to some of these challenges in negotiating PVAs. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Beth to talk a little bit about our solutions.
Thank you, Yvonne. So as Yvonne mentioned, we have a suite of solutions, and these are designed to be adaptable, to be flexible, and they're intended to generate efficiencies and optimize the PVA activities. Now, within the suite of solutions, there are 5 areas. Now, today we are going to be focusing on some a little bit more in depth, but I do want to mention the first 3. The interactive process map it provides a common understanding of the PVA life cycle. And what that does is provide a common ground and transparency across from the inception through until the end of that PVA in establishments, excuse me. What it does provide is a lot of transparency and provides some key considerations. Now, this interactive process map is downloadable. It illustrates the PVA lifecycle, as I mentioned, but where it's interactive is the solutions are embedded, and it allows the enablers, users to drill down for key details and any helpful tips. Some of those embedded tools are around stakeholder engagement, some PVA kickoff agendas, links to the glossary and the table of contents, which I'll mention next, as well as review checklists and some of the other tools that are within that process map. What this does, it helps to increase our efficiency and through the PVA development process. Now, I mentioned the glossary. There is the glossary, and what this does, it provides common understanding of key terms. This was developed through an extensive exercise through the team where they collected various terms that were being included within PVAs, and from that, it was narrowed down to key terms. In addition to the actual definition that was provided through TransCelerate, it also provides references to support and provide context to those definitions. Those references include Vigilance, FDA Code of Federal Regulations, as well as ICH guidelines. Moving to the table of contents, this is a framework of headings and points to consider, and these are for potential for incorporation into PVAs. It can also be leveraged to develop your own templates. In addition to the headings and the framework, it does provide those regulatory references so that it's clear where these are required. So when you think about these being adaptable based on the relationship, based on the product life cycle, whether it's investigational development, the user is able to pick and choose the relevant headings that are required in order to develop that PVA. Now, with that, there are 4 modules, and it provides, if you think about the breakdown of a PVA, it provides the background and purpose, which also includes the relevant legal context. The PV activities, when you think about your PV systems, your exchange of safety data, obligations across the 2 partnerships or multiple partnerships around who is responsible for what activities. And then the next module is around cooperation support. So think about your PSMF, your governance, your compliance, escalation. And then finally, appendices, where we talked earlier with the glossary, this is where you would include definitions, product territories across those partnerships, maybe contacts supporting the different activities within the PV section. And then finally, the addendum, which provides some points to consider. What this does, it provides options for picking and choosing based on that specific relationship. Now, today, we're going to be spending more time talking about timelines and benchmarking, as well as the audit process efficiency. And this is where we're going to provide a deeper dive. Now, you'll hear about the benchmarking exercise that was conducted with TransCelerate member companies. Data was blinded and aggregated, and providing a resource that can be leveraged internally when considering your own PV activities, as well as looking at your approaches when going into a negotiation. And finally, the most recent area of focus for this exercise has been the underpinning of the PVA lifecycle solutions, which is the audit process efficiency, which provides several solutions that help to optimize the audit process and help reduce the organizational burdens associated with business partner audits. Next slide. So when we talk about the potential solutions, as you can see, the positives of the benefits of these solutions is that it can reduce the drafting and negotiation time. Now, Yvonne mentioned earlier, by exercising on executing that PVA in a timely manner, it helps reduce the risk of delays with delivering key milestones, such as a clinical trial start, a product launch, an asset transfer, but it also reduces the potential for non-compliance. It also facilitates establishing a healthy partner relationship by reducing the potential for conflict because you're entering into that agreement with certain concepts and baselines already aligned. It also increases awareness, potential education of stakeholders, as well as maybe new team members across that PVA lifecycle, resources supporting the PVA lifecycle end-to-end. And then, of course, supporting the compliance, accuracy, the completeness of our PVAs, and ultimately support and enhance our patient safety. Next slide. I mentioned the stakeholders involved in PVAs. We don't want to think about just the PVA managers who may be drafting that PVA agreement or negotiating the terms that are part of the PVA. There are many stakeholders throughout both the organizations who are involved in this process, not just the business partner that enters into the main agreement and subsequently the PVA, who are both equally responsible for executing the terms on that agreement. But you have to think about all the different parties across your organization. You have your commercial business development functions, and all these roles could really benefit from using the references and the solutions, where it helps to identify dependencies across the stakeholders, where we are relying on each other in order to execute and establish PVAs and ensure we have compliance with that terms of the agreements. So when we think about our PVA stakeholders, it really is any functional area that has a role or responsibility in the review of establishing a PVA, the implementation, or oversight of the agreement, such as our operations, our QPPV, our auditing functions, and as mentioning that, the audit and compliance, right? So these are the functions responsible for confirming compliance to the PVA. So understanding what is within the scope of that PVA and how these solutions can really benefit all of these groups. It's really a matter of the optic of their role, their responsibilities, and providing greater insight and transparency into that PVA life cycle. Next slide. So at this time, I'm going to transition over to Wendy, who's going to be taking us through our timelines benchmarking exercise.
Thank you very much, Beth. And thank you all for joining us today. As you can go to the next slide, please. As Beth and Yvonne both had mentioned, one of the solutions and one of the initiatives that we looked at was timelines and what it takes to exchange safety data between companies and partners during clinical trials as well as in post-market agreements. And so next slide, please. Through this team, the timelines team, we work together to better understand, what are the differences in agreements in that data that needs to be exchanged, and what are the ideas of timelines that are needed to exchange that in order for both companies to be compliant with their needs. We did create a benchmarking survey and put together this survey and shared it with all member companies of TransCelerate. And through that, we collected information from specific ongoing PV agreements and what these exchange timelines are between the partners in these agreements. And so we had certain guidelines and limits to ensure that no one company would drive any of the data in one direction. And so once this was all collected, it was aggregated and anonymized, as Beth had said, and then evaluated to see what this looked like across all of these agreements. From that, you can see on this slide that a publication was then written to highlight just some of the findings from the data and to share in a publication in order for, again, companies to understand that what may be common amongst at least several companies in TransCelerate and what could be helpful for their company and their insight into their process when they're going into negotiations. And so next slide, please. Again, trying to give an example of how this information could be meaningful is when a company would go into an agreement and try to understand why their timelines that they'd like to negotiate are very different from other companies. And they can, again, go to this publication and the timelines benchmarking information and be able to see, are they an outlier? Do they kind of fall into the norm or the trends for the different types of data that need to be exchanged? And can go back and look at, are there operational efficiencies that could be gained to help their company be a little bit more in a better position when they go into negotiations. And so again, just to provide some insight so companies can see what the trend is, this was probably, if not the first, one of a few in many years that has looked at this kind of data and compared to what the different types of timelines and data that need to be exchanged. Next slide, please. And here we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the information, but first kind of a high-level schematic of what needs to be negotiated between two companies in a clinical trial, and where are the deliverables from each partner for this data. And most obviously, it's usually the regulatory reporting purposes to health authorities for individual cases and adverse events. Although also these need to be shared amongst sometimes other partners or other sites like investigators, IRBs, and things like that. So we'll look at an example in this next slide of some of the data that came from the benchmarking survey. So here you can see an example for serious adverse events that are fatal, life-threatening, and what the exchange timelines were on average, again, anonymized and aggregated between partners. You can see here it's bidirectional, so the blue shows the member company to the partner data exchange timeline, and the purple magenta shows the partner back to the member company, so bidirectional exchange. And you can see here it was pretty obvious that there's a very large consensus around day 4, day 5 that this information needs to be exchanged. And that is most likely driven by the regulatory requirements that all individual serious adverse events that are fatal and life-threatening need to be submitted to a health authority within 7 calendar days. So again, this is an example of where you can see a strong agreement and probably driven by regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. Here's a schematic moving from clinical trials into the post-market area, where you can see there's a little more circles and triangles and boxes where things can get a little bit more complicated, as sometimes there are a lot more partnerships and stakeholders and CROs and other agreements that are sometimes attached to the exchange agreement that's going on in a PVA, and where the safety data exchange timelines can fall in this post-market area. So if we go to the next slide, again, just one example from the benchmarking survey, a little bit more complicated as the prior chart, where you can see again a bidirectional exchange in timelines, where the blue and light blue are from the member company from TransCelerate to a partner, and the magenta and light magenta pink are the exchange from the partner back to the member company. And this is an example where the question was surrounding post-market serious adverse events, and it also split out, which is the light and the darker coloring, from solicited and spontaneous sources, since there can sometimes be some differences in the exchange and also the reporting of from those sources. So here you can see it's a broader range. There are several areas where an exchange dates where it's more common, and you can see that going out to 30 days, the regulatory reporting requirements are certainly different than clinical trial serious adverse events, and especially from, as we saw before, the fatal, life-threatening adverse events. So next slide, please. So as you can see, that the team really went through a lot of the different data, and from the publication standpoint, pulled out some good examples of where this data can help drive efficiencies and understanding between different companies as you go into negotiations. So now I'm going to turn it over to look at what our 5th initiative in this process.
Thank you, Wendy, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to the opportunity to speak to you a little bit more about our solutions for marketing partner audit process efficiency. I think, as we've heard already a little bit today, and I'm sure everyone will agree, pharmacovigilance agreements are an essential part of the pharmacovigilance system. Really, having implemented PVAs, we want to ensure that they are operationalized effectively, efficiently, and in a compliant manner. Audit, obviously an essential tool for compliance oversight that underpins all of the activities that really lead into operationalization of the pharmacovigilance agreement landscape. As a team, we really wanted to focus on the marketing partner audit initiative and look at the opportunities to innovate and drive efficiency in the way that we conduct audits today. Interesting to see from Yvonne in the earlier slide, the increase in commercial partnerships over time. And this really drove some of our thinking around why this was an area we wanted to drive efficiencies for marketing partner audits. It's fair to say audit is an essential tool for compliance oversight. And yet I think we all recognize that the resources and time spent for planning, conducting and executing pharmacovigilance audits, as well as to be on the receiving end of pharmacovigilance audits, does give a potential resource burden to the organization. And looking for those efficiencies in approach, so how we can really innovate the traditional audit model as a way to drive efficiency in audit execution. Clearly, we have some differing expectations when working across companies and across individual marketing partners, which does lead to some complexity in this space from an auditing execution perspective. And as a team, we saw a core opportunity really to look at risk-based audit approach. So how we select the right audits for conduct at the right time, driving highest value to the organization from a value and compliance perspective. Looking at audit scoping initiatives, so how we ensure that the audit scope is fully optimized, and really driving the maximum value and efficiency from our pharmacovigilance audit program. Thank you. So from a team perspective, looking to build that suite of solutions that were covering the full audit lifecycle management. So for those of you that's had an opportunity to look at the published solutions, there's a QR code on the slide or the link at the bottom of the page. But as a team, we set out to deliver for the full audit lifecycle, looking at things like audit candidate selection, so the right audits at the right time, so that we can focus our audit resources to those partnerships with the highest compliance risk and therefore value to our individual organizations. We wanted to look at optimizing scheduling and scoping efficiencies, and as well as innovating traditional audit models. So opportunities to drive greater efficiency, both in audit execution and audit follow-up from a response management perspective. Clearly, pharmacovigilance professionals would have a core interest in these types of solutions, so they are aligned to different approaches to pharmacovigilance audit, but certainly those with an interest in pharmacovigilance quality and compliance oversight, the quality function in general, qualified person for pharmacovigilance, as well as those who are on the receiving end of audit may well find an interest, considering that there are some points to consider to really help to streamline and drive efficiencies, both for auditors and for auditees in the marketing partner audit process. Next slide, please. So the first of our solutions really looks at audit risk prioritization. And the objective here in defining the solution was to focus resources on those partnerships that are going to have the highest value. As I've alluded already, audit's an important tool. It's a regulated requirement and it gives a core benchmark of partner performance, but we want to reserve that as a quality and compliance tool to those opportunities and those partnerships with the highest risk and value. What this solution aims to do is provide some points to consider for a risk stratified approach for marketing partner audit, helping organizations to select the right audits at the right time, recognizing that there is no one size fits all solution here, but some points to consider in individual organizations to help you develop a risk prioritization approach. Also an example scorecard which can be deployed on a risk proportionate basis. Looking at the solutions in general, as I've mentioned, it really helps to focus those audit resources, to use data and real-time insights around the organization to really highlight and pinpoint those partners which will have the highest impact and highest potential risk to your individual pharmacovigilance system, being those we should prioritize for pharmacovigilance audits. Next slide, please. Our second solution in the suite looks at a little bit around scheduling and scoping efficiencies. So recognizing that in a marketing partner audit landscape, we're operating across pharmacovigilance systems, across different organizations, scheduling in different time zones, different jurisdictions may be a challenge. So some core points to consider around efficiencies in the scheduling process. From a scoping perspective, we also wanted to give some thoughts and some considerations for efficient audit scoping. Again, looking at that risk basis and that risk proportionate approach, recognizing that from a marketing partner audit perspective, it's not our intention to certify each other's pharmacovigilance system, but really giving some a steer and some direction on executing audits scoped to the pharmacovigilance agreement. Again, using data and insights to de-scope audits and reserving the audit execution initiative for those activities where audit really is the core mechanism or the only way to give some insights into operational performance. Using those insights and tools to better scope and de-risk pharmacovigilance audits. Next slide, please. From a marketing partner audit conduct perspective, we did want to try and innovate the traditional audit model. And again, if you have an opportunity to look at the solutions, there are 6 options here of different approaches to pharmacovigilance audit, some of which may replace the traditional pharmacovigilance audit model, some of them which may supplement the model, so things like marketing partner compliance oversight, the traditional questionnaires, system review approach using tools that already exist and data that already exist within your organizations, such as metrics or pharmacovigilance system master file, which again can help to really focus and target audit scopes to drive an efficient audit execution methodology. From an innovation perspective, looking at ways that we maybe move away from the reciprocal audit model where company A audits company B and a tit-for-tat audit in a future audit cycle where company B re-audits company A, looking at more collaborative approaches where perhaps we audit the agreement in one audit, looking at compliance holistically for the pharmacovigilance agreement, whilst maintaining independence of the QA audit function in audit execution. And also thinking about things like more optimized models. So potential for perhaps multi-party audit, where you have one audit covering multiple partners, multiple partnerships in a joint approach, working through independent and mutually qualified audit service providers to give a broad oversight of marketing partner compliance with a view to reducing duplication and driving efficiencies and optimization. Again, recognizing that not every solution will be suitable for every organization, but really a pick list of options for innovating audit execution approaches that can be applied to different partnerships in a risk-based and risk proportionate fashion. Next slide, please. And finally, the final tool within the suite of solutions and the audit process lifecycle, looking at the marketing partner audit response process and follow-up. Again, the objective here with respect to the solution was really to look for ways, guidance, points to consider to drive efficiency into audit responses and follow-up process. Recognizing that when working across organizations, across quality systems, that we don't have common approaches to audit follow-up and CAPA management today, that in itself can lead to some challenges and pitfalls in follow-up of marketing partner audits. What we wanted to deliver was some points to consider, some additional expectations and considerations that can help avoid some of those pitfalls, are really around early communication, alignment on audit response management process across organizations, driving efficiency into the audit execution process in general. So in that way, covering the full landscape of marketing partner audits from scheduling, scoping, execution, and through audit response, follow-up, and management. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's all I've planned to share today in terms of the audit process efficiency tools, but an opportunity maybe to reflect on the broad tools in general for the full pharmacovigilance agreement optimization solutions, which are available via the TransCelerate website and through the QR code on the screen. As we've heard already today, a little bit about some of the other solutions, the interactive process map, the glossary, and the table of contents solution. And as we heard from Wendy specifically in the presentation around timelines benchmarking, and from myself with audit process efficiency. Additionally, on the website, you'll find some of the manuscripts and publications around the pharmacovigilance agreement lifecycle, as well as links to this and previous webinars that support all of the solutions across the full gambit of the PVAO initiative, covering all elements of PV agreement solution optimization. So again, an opportunity for each of you to review and access a number of these tools for use within your pharmacovigilance solutions. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass to Clint.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks to Yvonne, Beth, and Wendy, the other presenters as well. And thank you to the audience. We got a lot of great questions, and apologies for any we were not able to answer either by ground rules or time constraints. Unfortunately, we are nearing the top of the hour and the end of this webinar, but we want to point out that we have a few anonymized examples of implementation with other PVA optimization solutions, including this one, where a sponsor company used table of contents to enhance their PVA template updates for quality, compliance, and patient safety. We have another experience where a sponsor company regarded the PVAO glossary as a trusted resource for improving their PVA process to support clinical trial startup. You can find these implementation experiences also linked on your handout. I want to ask you to please contact us via email. We mentioned this earlier. If you have any feedback whatsoever or additional questions, and we also invite you to stay connected through our awareness and implementation community, to follow us on social media, or to explore our website for other tools and resources. You can also contact us with any lessons learned or implementation experiences. Finally, we encourage you to consider registering for our next public webinar, which will be titled, "Is Your RWD Regulatory Ready? Considerations when preparing RWD for a regulatory submission." This webinar will be held on Thursday, June the 6th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank you again for attending today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed the program. See you soon.